On 24 April 1980, 8 RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters left the deck of the American aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, anchored in the Gulf of Oman. Their mission? To orchestrate one of the most daring rescues ever attempted in modern history. Driven by the hope of succeeding where so many others would have hesitated, these men prepared to defy the impossible, unaware that the hours ahead will forever mark the history of American special operations. This mission has its origins in the hostage-taking at the American Embassy in Tehran on November 4, 1979, when 53 Americans were kidnapped by Iranian students after the United States overthrew the government of Ayatollah Khomeini. After months of fruitless diplomacy, President Jimmy Carter authorized Operation Eagle Claw on the 11th of April 1980. It was the first mission of Delta Force, led by its founder, Colonel Charlie Beckwith, who accompanied his team as ground commander. The Army Rangers were also part of the mission, responsible for ensuring Delta Force's safety along the way. Operation Eagle Claw is an extremely complex mission. Tehran was too far away for a helicopter to make the round trip, so a refueling stopover was necessary. Meanwhile, the hostages remained held in the sprawling American Embassy complex in Tehran, requiring a large team to storm and search the area in a city of 5 million people. A total of 132 Delta Force and Rangers personnel are being taken aboard 3 MC-130 Special Operations Transport aircraft, supported by 3 EC-130 logistics aircraft equipped with refueling tanks. The MC-130 seconds are to land at a remote desert site, known as Desert 1, to secure it before the Sea Stallions arrive to resupply. The helicopters will then transport the Delta and Ranger teams to the outskirts of Tehran. The plan called for a coordinated assault on the embassy during the following night, supported by AC-130 helicopters and a team of secret CIA operators. Once the hostages had been freed, the team was to regroup at a captured airfield, where a rapid exfiltration of all the hostages was planned. This ambitious operation involved considerable risk and required perfect synchronization of the various units involved. Shortly after 6 p.m. local time, the MC-130 and EC-130 took off from the island of Mazira, off the east coast of the Sultanate of Oman, and reached Iranian airspace within 2 hours, en route to Desert 1. To avoid detection by Iranian radars, the aircraft flew at low altitude, making them more vulnerable to unforeseen weather conditions. The transport soon encountered intense sandstorms called haboobs, kicking up dense, suffocating dust. Although the transports were not seriously affected, the Air Force controller, Major Don Carney, issued a radio warning to the base about the storms for the Sea Stallions. Unfortunately, this encrypted message never reached the helicopters, which had taken off after the planes and were on their way to Desert 1. As a result, the helicopters remained vulnerable to the harsh environmental conditions, complicating their mission and exposing the operation to increased risk. The Sea Stallions helicopters, operating under the call signs Barba Blue 1 to Barba Blue 8, are maintaining strict radio silence to preserve the discretion of the mission. Earlier, despite their delayed takeoff, they had temporarily observed the transport aircraft flying overhead due to the difference in speed and altitude of the aircraft. The success of the mission depended on these helicopters. At least 6 of them had to reach Desert 1, or risk cancellation. Suddenly, a warning light came on in the cockpit of Bluebeard 6, indicating a nitrogen leak in the rotors, a potentially fatal problem. Forced to make an emergency landing, the crew of Barba Blue 6 were picked up by the crew of Barba Blue 8, leaving one less helicopter for the operation. With this setback, the operation's margin for error became critical. Shortly after entering Iranian airspace, the remaining helicopters came up against their first haboob, a dense and threatening wall of sand that foreshadowed the increasingly formidable challenges of this unforgiving desert. This phenomenon makes their progress even more perilous, accentuating the risks of an already compromised mission. 2 hours into their journey, the MC-130S reached Desert 1 and began their landing. As the pilots scanned the area, they spotted a tanker crossing the perimeter on their infrared screens, jeopardizing the mission. Delta Force Captain Wade Ishimoto decided to act without delay. No sooner had the planes landed than he and his team, made up of Delta operators and Rangers, set off in pursuit of the truck in a Jeep and a motorbike. To neutralize the threat, A Ranger fires an anti-tank missile at the vehicle, causing a massive explosion as the truck, filled with fuel, bursts into flames, lighting up the night with a gigantic blaze. Taking advantage of the chaos, the driver escaped in a nearby van, which was too fast to be caught. The commanders assume that he is probably a fuel smuggler who is reluctant to warn the authorities, but the situation remains tense. Just as the dust and commotion were settling, another incident occurred. Major Delta Logan Fitch suddenly sees the headlights of a bus coming towards them. A civilian vehicle full of Iranian passengers, apparently lost and unaware of what is happening. To neutralize the potential risk, Fitch orders his team to fire on the bus's engine block, forcing it to stop. The shocked passengers were immediately placed under surveillance by the forces on site. This unexpected double interruption considerably complicates the mission, adding further tension to an already perilous operation. A Delta unit operator remarked to Colonel Beckwith, "The helicopters shouldn't have any trouble finding us now." With the area now brightly lit, the Delta team secured 44 Iranian civilians, holding them in the immobilized bus under strict surveillance to prevent any leak of compromising information. They had to be transported to the island of Mazira to preserve the confidentiality of the mission. Despite these unforeseen circumstances, the other C-130S managed to land, and the crew began setting up the refueling point as planned. The 7 Sea Stallions face intense haboob storms, with the dust damaging the equipment and reducing visibility. Bluebeard 2 suffered a hydraulic leak but kept going, while Bluebeard 5 had electrical problems and had to turn back. Commander Schaefer's Bluebeard 3 continued on its way for 3 hours, flying blind until it narrowly avoided a mountain, revealed by the dissipating dust. Major Schaefer breathed a sigh of relief and thanked his co-pilot for their quick decision. Back at Desert 1, tensions ran high when the ground crew realized that the Sea Stallions were running late. After 25 minutes of nervous waiting, the helicopters finally appeared, scattered and arriving at random, out of the formation originally planned. Major Schaefer, exhausted, oversees the smooth landing of Bluebeard 3 and informs Colonel Beckwith that his crew is exhausted from the arduous journey. Beckwith, frustrated by the accumulated delays, felt that the pilots lacked control. Determined to continue the operation, he prepared to move forward, provided that at least 6 helicopters remained operational to complete the mission. While the ground team was refueling, a new critical situation arose. The rotor of Barb Blue 2 stopped temporarily, revealing a failure of its emergency fuel pump, damaged by the abrasive desert dust. Although the other 5 helicopters remained operational, this incident seriously compromised the mission, making it impossible to reach Tehran with a reduced fleet. Beckwith, frustrated by the turn of events and realizing that the mission could no longer succeed in such conditions, informed Washington. The stunned advisors asked if it was possible to continue with 5 helicopters, but Beckwith admitted that the risk was too high. Unfortunately, the mission was canceled. The team moves on to preparations for the return, destroying equipment and planting false Russian documents to fool the Iranians. Carter, trying to reassure his advisors, takes comfort in the fact that no Americans or civilians were hurt. The situation escalated when the pilot of Bluebeard 3 held the helicopter in a hover, waiting for further instructions. A misinterpretation of the ground controller's signals prompted him to move forward, thinking that the way was clear for the neighboring EC-130. In reality, the Sea Stallion collided violently with the tail of the EC-130, triggering a massive explosion and fire that quickly consumed both aircraft. Inside the EC-130, Commander Fitch and his team struggled desperately to extricate themselves from the burning aircraft as it disintegrates around them. Although Fitch and several crew members managed to escape, the EC-130's fuel tank eventually exploded in a gigantic fireball, costing the lives of 8 American soldiers, 5 U.S. Air Force personnel aboard the EC-130, and 3 Marines aboard the Sea Stallion. Colonel Beckwith was devastated and ordered the remaining Sea Stallions to be abandoned, fearing another catastrophic crash. The helicopters could not be destroyed on site, as an explosion could have endangered the other means of transport present, in particular the EC-130 used for the exfiltration of the troops. 3 other helicopters were damaged by the explosion of a stock of ammunition aboard the burning C-130, making it literally impossible to continue the mission. The only option left was to leave with the other aircraft, leaving behind the dead, the helicopters, and the burning C-130. In the rush, compromising documents were also left behind. Meanwhile, the passengers on the Iranian bus, who had witnessed the disaster, were released. The task force then boarded the planes to return to Mazara. Operation Eagle Claw was a monumental failure, dealing a severe blow to Carter's presidency and contributing to his defeat in the 1980 presidential elections. Subsequently, another hostage rescue mission was envisaged, involving a massive force of 50 aircraft aimed at remedying the problems of the first attempt. However, this ambitious plan was canceled due to a lack of logistical and operational resources to ensure its success. 7 months later, Iran agreed to release the hostages in exchange for a freeze on their assets and a promise from the United States not to interfere in Iranian affairs. On the 20th of January 1981, after 444 days in captivity, the hostages were finally released, putting an end to their long ordeal. Thus ended the story of Operation Eagle Claw, a mission that was tragically aborted, but whose consequences had a profound effect on the military and political history of the United States of America. In our next video, immerse yourself in the fascinating world of the GIGN, France's elite law enforcement unit, and discover their key role in the fight against terrorism and hostage rescue operations. It's a story of courage and expertise that you won't want to miss.